What's up, everyone? We're back for post-game Locked On Bucks, except the game that we just watched might not be the number one topic of conversation here as we roll on the podcast. DeMarcus Cousins on the way out. We knew this date was coming. We're going to break it all down, and then we will touch on maybe not the most enjoyable game of all time to watch. The Bucks lost to the Raptors. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show daily and also find my work over at ESPN. And joining me, it feels like for the first time in a long time, he's back at home. We can see this his beautiful, normal setup that he's got, better than Mitchell Mowers, the founder of BrewHoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden. Frank, first of all, it's good to be hanging out with you again. And as is always the case, you think you know what you're going to talk about on a podcast, and it changes very quickly. Of course, we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every single day. And today, Bucks fans are going to be waking up and wanting to know what is going on with Boogie Cousins. Why are the Bucks cutting him? We knew this guarantee date was coming up. The 7th of January was the date that they had to get this done. Frank, go for it. The floor is yours. We've discussed this a lot. This has been a big topic that we've gone through and thought what potentially could happen here. But what was your initial reaction when you saw this news come through? That was really only minutes after the final buzzer here in the loss to Toronto.
Yeah, I think there was some indication this wasn't as shocking as maybe it was to some people earlier today. But I didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know it was necessarily going to be announced or, leaked, right? I mean, John Horst gave a quoted statement to Woj. So not exactly like, a sources say. It's like John Horst told him. But yeah, I mean, I think there's just like multiple. I mean, for a guy who's like a minimum guy, who's a bench player, that I think we've talked about it. Like, I don't really see defensively how he could play in the playoffs. There's a lot of dimensions to this. So I mean, I don't want to talk for an hour about Boogie Cousins and the great controversy of him.
You don't,
but let's just say it this way. I think the obvious pro is he really gave a shot in the arm to the offense. He wasn't super efficient. I think he was about 56% true shooting. But especially against some of these bad teams, when the Bucks were missing guys, like the Dallas game was obviously kind of a game that stood out. Some of the Orlando games, he knew how to go at, G League players and teams that, necessarily didn't always have their shit together, and give the Bucks good minutes, useful minutes, especially help offensively. It was interesting, and we talked about when he signed, a little counterintuitively, the last couple of years going from his Warriors, Clippers, and Rockets tenures, which granted pretty small sizes, samples of each, he was always basically like those teams were always worse with him offensively and better with him defensively, and which was kind of counterintuitive, but it's kind of like maybe because he's not very high efficiency and he just sort of it kind of throws teams out of rhythm a little bit, having to play through him, and he doesn't necessarily know how to be like a complimentary guy or something. Maybe that's why the offensive stuff hasn't worked out so well. And defensively, yeah, he's this big space eater, and that can have value in regular season, just, being a big guy who rebounds, things like that. But certainly his tenure in Milwaukee, you look at the data here, the more logical numbers bear out. Overall, he was a plus player for the Bucks, which, I mean, I think in the grand scheme of things, like, that's really what you wanted. Like, just have a guy that could come in, eat innings while Brook Lopez was hurt and not hurt you on the floor. And certainly Bucks were much better offensively with him on the floor, which, even though he shot really poorly from three, he did a really nice job, inside as a rim roller, developing some nice chemistry with Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday. And just using that skill level he has to score points, not super efficiently, but efficiently enough, even with his 3-point shot not falling, and rebounding pretty well, offensive rebounding. So I think that was obviously kind of the big positive. And again, just giving the Bucks a body, because honestly, like so many teams, like the Bucks have just needed NBA caliber players. And I think that's, he's an NBA caliber player, at least a regular season NBA caliber player for sure. And so, I mean, I expect he'll be somewhere in the NBA after this. I don't think he's going to not go signed, especially with all the COVID absences. So curious kind of where he lands. But if that was the positive, I think the negatives were also pretty obvious. Defensively, the Bucks allowed teams to shoot 78% at the rim with him on the floor this year, which is 16% worse than when he's on the bench. That is like stupefyingly bad. His mobility is obviously a problem, and I also don't necessarily know why the Bucks played as aggressively as they did with him in pick and roll coverages, for instance. But again, I don't think he looked like he could hang back and protect the rim playing drop either. We saw that like in some of those games, like Dallas games, like when people put him into pick and roll, he just couldn't, he couldn't play center field the way we're used to Brook Lopez and Giannis being able to play center field and, kind of play those two guys at once. You just can't play 2-on-2 pick and roll coverage with him. So, I think that sort of showed like, look, I mean, just think back to like, if you play a series against the Phoenix Suns or, the Atlanta Hawks, right? With pick and roll point guards like what we saw the Bucks have to face last year, I don't think you can keep Boogie on the floor in those types of matchups. As much as he can do stuff offensively, especially when you're stretching out and playing, Giannis, Chris, Drew major minutes. I just think it gets very, very hard to justify that. And, we saw that, right? His numbers, the Clippers were killed when he was on the floor last year in the playoffs as well. So I don't, I think we've been talking about, I don't think he was going to be a relevant, player in a playoff setting. I think obviously the Bucks are very much needing Brook Lopez to come back in order to be, I think, the contender that people want them to be. I think if Brook doesn't come back, again, we'll probably keep talking about, Robin Lopez, or if there's somebody else potentially. Hopefully Brook, edges closer to a return. But certainly he's not coming back next week, right? So I don't think the Bucks made this decision because Brook is imminently coming back or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really the kind of the basketball piece of this. I think the other relevant piece is, I think certainly financially, if they waited another day to make this move, he's about $600,000 guaranteed that they will have paid him. If they had guaranteed him and then waived him, next week or a month from now, whatever, it would have been another 600 grand plus, which again, when you're in the kind of the luxury tax area that the Bucks are in, that's basically a 3 to 4x in tax payments on top of that. So suddenly keeping him an extra day, again, I'm not saying that they would have kept him one more day and then waived him this weekend or something, but that's like a $3 million difference from like an actual cash perspective. So of course, like, the finances of that are going to play into this. If you don't think he's a playoff player, if you don't think that, he's a guy that you can't replace with, some other solution here. But that's obviously a question. They signed Luke Cornett to one of these 10-day COVID hardship contracts. We haven't seen him at all. I'm curious if we will see him during his 10-day or if we won't. He's a guy that, has had some moments in the NBA at least, and a little more of a kind of typical rim protector and floor stretcher. But again, is Luke Cornett the guy that's going to get you through the Brook Lopez injury? I don't think any of us are really looking at it as that guy either. So look, I think it's multiple things. And then I think the other piece, which I find very interesting, like nobody on Twitter is talking about Mike Budenholzer's opinion of DeMarcus. Let's just say if Bud wanted DeMarcus back, I think DeMarcus would not have been waived today. And, again, we don't see what happens behind closed doors. But look, I mean, as much as people I think have said, hey, Boogie's a guy that's well liked in locker rooms. I don't know that he's a Mike Budenholzer type of guy because of some of those defensive issues, because of, he's got terrible body language. He picks up technicals. Again, it was a little bit of an interesting choice. He's not like a Bucks type, not just a Bud type player, a Bucks type player. When you think about just sort of the way he carries himself, and again, not to say he's like a bad person or something like that. I don't think he is. But he's always sort of sulking on the court. Again, it goes back. He's always been a guy that picks up technicals, complains a lot. He's obviously not, some super two-way, hard effort, try hard type guy. And it's a little different. Like the Bucks typically with these role players, they have gone with the kind of, role player, good soldier type guys, not the fallen star type guys. And Boogie was definitely a departure in that regard. And, obviously it's, I think, pretty telling of what sort of players Bud and the Bucks like, that Wes Matthews, who was signed shortly after Boogie, will be guaranteed and is going to be with the Bucks, presumably here through the rest of the season, versus Boogie is getting waived before the guarantee date. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's just that combination of, not a playoff player. Financially, there was, a loss of flexibility here. Now you can, go out and sign somebody else without taking a huge tax and cash hit for doing that. So again, we always say it's not the job of fans to worry about, the owner's pocketbooks. So I think based purely on that, you can say, hey, if he's still giving you useful minutes and helping you kind of eat time while Brook is coming back from injury, just keep him until you don't need him, right? I mean, financially, that's not the way that you would typically expect a team to operate. But I think from a fan perspective, that's a totally normal and acceptable perspective to take. But again, I think there's multiple dimensions to this. And, again, ultimately, Bud was playing him, but, was Bud going to go to bat for him the way he certainly in like the story today around the Journal Sentinel around Wes Matthews, Bud was effusive in his praise and how much he loved having Wes Matthews around and all this. I don't think that same article was ever going to be written about Bud and Boogie Cousins, but as Horst kind of pointed out in some of the quotes to Adrian Wojnarowski, I think this was a mutually beneficial arrangement while it lasted. I think Boogie got to show that, he can still play a little bit, even though he has limitations. And I think the Bucks did get something out of it. And, for better or worse, doesn't look like that will continue beyond tonight.
Well, you've covered it all, so that's going to do it here tonight on Locked On Bucks. And I will say, by the way, Frank, you moved your microphone a little bit after you started talking, and the audio got instantly better, which is perfect because I should point out after yesterday's podcast, plenty of people were saying, listen, this is choppy. What's going on with your internet? I've said it before that the Australian internet is a serious problem right now. We've got storms that have been rolling through for a couple of days straight, which the Australian internet needs no excuses to be terrible. So I'm battling through. I understand my audio is not the best today, but we appreciate you sticking with us anyway. Look, I'm doing my best here. But one thing, when you mentioned the John Horst quotes that stood out to me, you said we made a strategic decision to have an open roster spot. That tells you that the Bucks might be doing some shopping over the next few weeks, which is perfect because Shopify is sponsoring the podcast today. And Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources once reserved for big business. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. Scaling your business is a journey of endless possibility, Frank. So like mine, Shopify powers millions of businesses from first sale to full scale, reaching customers online and across social networks with an ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. I wonder if Locked On Bucks will ever move on to TikTok. We'll see what happens there. But go to Shopify.
I'm a big TikTok fan, by the way. You'd think I wouldn't because I'm an old dad, but TikTok, I never post anything on TikTok, but I find it very entertaining.
I think you should start posting some of your own TikToks and then putting them on Twitter so people like me can be involved. But anyway, go to shopify.com/LockedOnNBA. That's all lowercase for a free 14-day trial, and you'll get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/LockedOnNBA right now. That's shopify.com/LockedOnNBA. All right. So one thing as we try and navigate through why people have reacted so emotionally to this, Frank, and honestly, I was watching the game on a little bit of a delay, and people are pissed. So let's acknowledge that first of all. Now, I remember when they first signed Boogie Cousins, I felt a little bit bad for saying this, but I remember saying it on the podcast. I think he's kind of like a poor man's Bobby Portis. Now, you've gone through and you've said the reasons why you don't think that he would be playable in the playoffs. I totally agree. Bobby Portis, we saw, was unplayable in certain matchups during the postseason run last year. And quite simply, he's a better player than Boogie. So do I see that both of those guys are going to be in a playoff rotation? No, I don't. And even if you get emotionally attached to Boogie Cousins, which I have as well, I said I want him to succeed. I want him to go somewhere else and do well because you can see how much that he actually really wants it. And he's been through a lot. But the reality is the Bucks aren't here to say, well, this is a great story. Let's keep Boogie Cousins around. They're trying to win a championship. And they need this. They're going to move open this roster spot. They are going to make a move in the next month. We know it, probably regardless of what's going on with Brook Lopez. They've done it every single year. So I wasn't totally shocked by this. I'm certainly not outraged by it. But look, Boogie will go somewhere else. I have no doubt he'll be on another team here in the next few weeks. And good luck to him. I hope it works out well. But people will tell you, and I saw this on Twitter, and I think it's a fine reason to be angry about it or whatever. So I'll throw it to you, Frank. People will say, well, fine, but at least Boogie Cousins was contributing on this team over the last few weeks. What about Shemi Ojale? Why is he still on the roster? I saw a number of people I didn't say this, but I saw people saying Thanasis. Why is Thanasis on the roster? Again, I didn't say that. I saw it on Twitter. Okay, let me be clear.
Because he's Giannis's brother. Figure it out, guys.
Okay. Well, that one might be easier to answer, but you understand the point. People will say, well, he actually contributed on the floor. So how do you respond to that when you look at a guy like Shemi Ojale, who, honestly, I will say, not through his own faults. I mean, he's hardly got a run at it here, but he hasn't really contributed anything all season long.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, because Shemi Ojale, unfortunately, has a fully guaranteed contract, or had a fully guaranteed contract. I mean, his contract would have guaranteed anyway, but it is an interesting question. I mean, I think if his contract had not been guaranteed, it is an interesting question about whether the Bucks would have actually kept him, especially because Wes Matthews was signed, and again, they're not exactly like for like, but again, if you're talking yourself into Shemi Ojale being like a Kevin Durant stopper, then I don't know that Wes Matthews. You'd have a harder time talking yourself into Wes Matthews being that guy either. Either guy is just gonna, would just get abused probably, and PJ Tucker did too for most of that series. So yeah, I think that's the main piece there, is the fact that the Bucks could waive Boogie Cousins and not have to pay him any more money versus they couldn't do that with Shemi Ojale. Also, I mean, Shemi is trade eligible. You can aggregate him in trades. And I was shout out to Nihilus Bucks. He called out that Boogie wouldn't have been eligible to be used as like a trade aggregation piece before the deadline. So that's an important kind of factor as well. Just again, flexibility can mean multiple things here. The tradability of that contract is part of that. So yeah, I mean, I think for better or worse, it is what it is. I think if Boogie, it is an interesting question. Like if Boogie had been tradable at the deadline, do they just keep him and then, pay some other team $1 million to take his contract and, pay Boogie whatever it would have been, like a couple $100,000.
Probably right, because you keep the production. I mean, it's not like they don't. It's not like they don't have a need right now to have him for a few minutes.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. And unfortunately, the timing is particularly bad because. Did he even score in the second half? He had a huge first half tonight. I don't think he even scored in the second half, but the timing was especially bad because the Bucks, trip over themselves and just lose an inexcusable game on Monday, and then suddenly Giannis is ill, misses tonight's game. They lose a number of other players due to COVID, and then the Raptors come in and they're just a better team than the Bucks when the Bucks are shorthanded like this. I mean, I don't think there was anything shocking about the Raptors winning this game tonight. And so all of a sudden now, you've lost 2 games in a row and you've got, a real NBA schedule ahead of you, which, I mean, the Bucks have had the easiest schedule in the league and now things are about to get hard. And so, I think for everybody, the emotions are a bit raw, given that the Bucks have not been providing, at least in these last 2 games, a whole lot to feel good about. And obviously the depth is once again being challenged, right? I mean, it's just the way this season is going. A week ago, the Bucks had like two guys on the injury report, and it was like, oh wow, the Bucks are finally healthy, and now here we are a week later, and I'm still waiting to hear the Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton has entered the health and safety protocol story, because again, just the way that the Omicron variant is kind of ripping through teams. Chris, and again, I have no idea. I'm 100% speculating, just given what we're seeing about reinfection and things like that. Drew hasn't had COVID since last season. We know he's vaccinated, but again, the way this has been kind of going through, guys have still been getting caught. So yeah, not a great time to have to drop this news. But again, I don't. Let me say this: that it's not like they were deciding this tonight, obviously, and I think certainly the full accounting of this, I'm sure, was worked out between Bud and the front office over the last couple weeks, and who knows, right? Who knows what they would have needed to see, or what would have had to happen for them to keep him. But it is what it is, and I think now the interesting question is, what do they do in terms of those backup big minutes? We saw Mamu come in and provide pretty good minutes tonight, but Mamu's not a real center, and so presumably they're either going to play small. Maybe they'll play Luke Cornett, who's a more traditionally sized NBA center. And then I think the most interesting question is just like, do they actually try to sign some guys to 10 days here and fill that 15th roster spot? So not hardship exceptions, but do they look at possibility of signing someone to a quote unquote regular roster spot? Interestingly, they don't really have to, because they have all these guys out with COVID, so they can sign guys using the COVID exceptions for now, which provides them some extra flexibility, because normally you can do 2 10 days and then you have to sign a guy to a full NBA contract. I believe with the COVID hardship exceptions, I think those act as sort of like extra contracts you can provide. So anyway, we'll see what happens, but yeah, I think we're all curious to see what the Bucks do with that extra roster spot, and do they sit on it a while? Because certainly if you use it now, then you're not going to be able to waive the guy tomorrow and only pay a prorated salary. If you sign somebody now, that person's going to get $600,000-$700,000 for the rest of the season. You're going to hit that tax payment multiplier on top of that. So whoever they potentially use this roster spot on, that's going to be a guy that they're presumably going to need to keep the rest of the season. And again, you may want to keep that roster spot open just, for a potential, extra trade spot moving towards the deadline, which I think is around February 10th this year.
Yeah, on yesterday's podcast, I went through the list of players that have had COVID, who hasn't, and just sort of put on the agenda who could be coming up here. And Drew was one guy that I mentioned. One person I didn't mention was the coach. So unfortunately, Bud's in the protocol. Hopefully he's feeling well. We should say shout out to Darvin Ham. Got to step up tonight, and obviously they weren't able to pick up the win. But I think he's been a guy that we're all hoping would get an opportunity somewhere. But I would bet that he'll get an opportunity at some point. But if you are into betting, you should head to betonline.ag. They're wishing everyone a happy new year and happy new betting as well, as the NBA heads towards the playoffs, NFL as well. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action in 2022. New year and new updated desktop and mobile website. You can sign up today, use the promo code Locked On, and you'll get a 50% welcome bonus there as well, whether it's football, basketball, hockey, UFC, whatever it may be. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet and wager on all your favorite sports. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. I've been mentioning the Locked On Now podcast, Frank. You might not want to listen to it tomorrow after a Bucks loss, but just keep an eye out for the Locked On Now podcast. You get a quick wrap around from all the Locked On podcasts around the league and find out what happened overnight. I was thinking about this game tonight, Frank, anyway, and part of, as you sort of alluded to, part of the problem is the fact that Boogie Cousins just had 15 and 10 and hit a couple threes, and that maybe adds a little bit of salt to the wound. But I think when you don't have Giannis in the lineup, we've spoken so much about how Drew has stepped up. It was a pretty rough night for him. He did have the 12 assists, but he had 8 turnovers. He was only 5 for 15 from the field. The Bucks had no problem scoring in the first half, but it got really, really ugly after that point. And I was actually surprised to look at this box score and see that Chris Middleton had 25 points. I felt like he was kind of quiet tonight. That really snuck up on me there as well. But overall, it was pretty sloppy. And when you don't have Giannis, you kind of sit there and say, okay, well, is this going to be a Jordan Moore 30-point night, 25-point night, or you're going to have to shoot really well from three tonight? They were able to hit 43% of their threes, and it still wasn't enough. But they scored 111 points. It felt, and a lot of that was in the first half, but it got pretty sloppy down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, hard to find a bigger contrast of halves. I mean, they score 42 points in the first quarter, 35 in the second, and 11 in the third quarter. And I'll just go back to normally what we say, right, is that the Bucks have to win the 3-point line when they're playing without Giannis. They we're basically even, 17 of 39 for the Bucks, 16 of 36 for the Raptors. So I mean, it's not like the Raptors just got ridiculously hot from three and just rode that to a win. Both teams 32 paint points, and so really came down to even the free throw line. Bucks were +1 at the free throw line. Really just came down to the Raptors hit a bunch of mid-range shots. Pascal Siakam was like pulling up on mid-range jump shots. 20-10, they outscored the Bucks from mid-range, and it's kind of weird that we point at their mid-range game as a differentiator, but that was the biggest difference. Offensive rebound rates, 23% for the Bucks, 22% for the Raptors. It was pretty close. Team turnovers though, 19 for the Bucks, only 15 for the Raptors. I mean, I think both teams were pretty sloppy, but the Bucks were even sloppier. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's kind of surprising when I look at the box score, and Fred VanVleet had 19 points on 18 shots. He was 5 out of 10 for three. It felt like he was like 5 for 6 from three.
I thought he had another kid or something. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. And for those who don't know what Kane's referring to, he had his first child, I guess, right ahead of or during the Eastern Conference Finals when the Bucks lost to the Raptors, and he was, had an historically incredible streak there to end that series. So, I was kind of a little surprised that he wasn't even more effective. But Pascal Siakam just went like right through Chris Middleton twice to start the game. He missed a layup on one of those, scored on the other. And when I saw that, I was just like, Chris Middleton doesn't have a chance against this dude. Like, Siakam's just, he's 6'8". He's not enormous, but he's really strong and has gotten very good at getting to his spots. And obviously he's, an athletic guy. And I was almost surprised that he didn't like bulldoze Middleton more in this game, because as much as the Raptors were playing without a true center, they can play. They can be big without giving up sort of like athleticism and mobility and defensive versatility. When you start Siakam, Anunoby, and Scotty Barnes, all those guys are in that like 6'8" to 6'10" type range. And have really good ability to switch and bother guys around the basket. So yeah, I mean, I thought that obviously just gave the Bucks kind of problems all night. I just thought in the second half, the Raptors were just way better at the point of attack and just made life a lot harder. And it's interesting. I mean, I was looking at a number of the kind of advanced metrics. I mean, love Fred VanVleet. I think he's an all-star this year. I was really hoping Jrue Holiday could kind of keep up his strong play and really kind of, have a little bit of a statement game against him. But, unfortunately, Jrue 12 assists, that's nice. But for the most part, I thought VanVleet just got the best of that matchup. And again, VanVleet wasn't awesome, 19 points on 18 shots, 5 assists, but just 1 turnover. And you compare that to Jrue, 15 points, 12 assists, 8 turnovers. Especially in the second half, like it looked like he got frustrated and he was trying to force stuff and he was just booting the ball and, just making bad mistakes. And, the Bucks just got very frustrated, right? I mean, Middleton got that technical in the final 2 minutes. He was really pissed. And like you, I was very surprised. I mean, looking at his line, the fact that he was 9 out of 16, 6 of 8 from the free throw line, that's one of the best stat lines he's had against Nick Nurse in quite a while. I mean, the Raptors have frustrated him a lot. And again, I thought, he could have been even better tonight if not for, some of the defense that they played against him. So yeah, I mean, again, like this is why you want to win the games against the Detroit Pistons when you have your 3 best players at home, and the Bucks don't do that on Monday. And then, they get some bad injury news here, and they get some really hot shooting. I thought they moved the ball really well in the first half. The zone kind of helped, I think, throw off the Raptors a bit to kind of let the Bucks get back into it and build, a pretty consistent double-digit lead for much of that first half. But then, the third quarter showed up, and they just didn't have anybody who could go get a bucket, right? And even though the 3-point numbers ended up still being pretty good, I think they were 13 out of 21 in the first half or something like that. So that put them at 4 of 18 in the second half. I mean, you got to score more than 34 points either way on that. But, certainly when Chris was the only guy having a really efficient night. Portis, I mean, Bobby had tons of foul trouble. He was really frustrated. I don't know what kind of trash talk he was doing after he blocked Siakam in the final minute and started trash talking him. It's like, Bobby, like, he's destroyed you guys tonight and you sucked. Like, what are you trash talking? But I don't know. The Bucks were clearly frustrated by this game, and the Raptors, I think were in their heads by the end of it.
Yeah, just a couple of quick notes as we wrap it up. You spoke about the size of the Raptors, and it's interesting to look at the box score and you see that they only brought 4 guys off the bench, but 3 of those guys were Ken Birch, Chris Boucher, and Precious Achiuwa. You're talking about whether you want to call them fives or whatever, but they're bigger guys. So they're one of the more interesting lineup roster dynamics across the league, just in terms of the size they have. And then, of course, they throw Freddie out there as the token small fella they have out there in the lineup, and he obviously played pretty well. The second point, just on Siakam, there was one particular blow by on Chris, where Chris was just left in the dust, just standing there, and I thought to myself, Siakam's become this guy that most people overlook across the league because he had that almost MVP buzz early in the season a couple of years ago, and now most people have realized, okay, well, he's probably not that guy, but he's still a really good player. But for the Bucks, when you take Giannis out of the lineup and you take Brook Lopez out of the lineup and you have nothing behind a guy like Chris Middleton, it's like, okay, yeah, he's going to be able to score at will, and he did that. So the Bucks obviously found it difficult tonight. Just looking ahead, you said that they have a real NBA schedule. Brooklyn in a couple of days, Friday night, 6:30 p.m. tip. It's in Brooklyn, so there's going to be no Kyrie Irving, but he did play tonight, and they had 79 points between the 3 of them. Kyrie had 22 points. He was 9 for 17. So, maybe he's been getting some shots up over the last few months. Who knows? But that's going to be a challenging matchup, even withstanding that Kyrie's not going to be there, because they actually can upgrade and start Patty Mills at the point guard. So the Nets will be just fine, and that's going to be a difficult matchup for the Bucks, who are 10 games over 500 now. After this one, don't forget to check out the Locked On Bets podcast with your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. They'll have you covered with everything you need there if you're into that type of thing. Any final thoughts, Frank, on what is actually an eventful podcast? I'm sure there'll be plenty of feedback. I'm looking forward to hearing how everyone is feeling about the Boogie Cousins situation.
Yeah, I'm really curious how they kind of respond on Friday. I mean, I tweeted about it. It was not a very well-liked tweet because it sort of nobody really pushed back on it, but there were not a lot of likes on it. I pointed out, the Bucks are now 8-7 against 500 or better teams this year, which is extremely mediocre. It's also the fewest games that any team has played against 500 or better teams. I mean, they've had by far the easiest schedule in the league. And you just look at the teams that they've beaten. Obviously, the opening night win makes sense. We have this conversation now, given they're playing the Nets in the next game. Obviously, the opening night win was extremely impressive. Since then, they've been first off, they haven't played many teams that actually have had their best players. And you look at their wins, they basically have no really impressive wins outside of the first game of the season. Look, this isn't the NCAA tournament. You don't need, a resume of wins. It's just the standings, right? But okay, they beat Denver without Jokic. They beat the Nuggets or the Mavericks without Luka. They beat the Lakers without LeBron. You kind of go down the list. They beat the Heat that one game. Neither Jimmy nor Bam played. Giannis was out of that game too. But really, the only games they've won against kind of full strength teams that are above 500 were home games against the Cavs and Hornets, and neither of those games was very resounding, let's say. So they've pretty much just beaten the crap out of a lot of teams that aren't very good or have been dealing with. Obviously, lots of teams have been dealing with injuries and things like that. So. The good news is I think it was really similar last year. The Bucks really didn't felt like they couldn't get big wins last year, and then they won that stretch of games where they had Philly and the Nets games at home. But even those games, Kyrie, I think Harden I'm trying to remember, was Harden out of those games? It wasn't the full strength Nets in those games, and the Sixers were dealing with injuries as well. The big difference this year is we know the Bucks can win an NBA championship because they just did that. So I think that's why there's not really reason to panic. But in terms of looking at this team and just saying where are they going to finish in the East? Are they going to make a run at the top spot in the East? They've been pretty just winning the games they should at this point. And I'm very curious to see here as this next month, how are they going to do? I mean, are they actually going to go, especially given that they're not going to be at full strength, they're not going to have Brook Lopez. Can they actually win consistently against some of the better teams in the league, or are they going to kind of trudge through the regular season again, kind of like they did for much of the season last year, especially now when they know that they can win an NBA championship. They don't really have as much to prove. I think Friday, I'm sure coming off 2 straight losses, the Nets you hope would have, kind of bring out the best in them. I'm definitely looking forward to see kind of how they respond in that game. And obviously you hope they kind of, again, they don't have to make a statement game, but as fans, as people who have to talk about this team every day, more or less, it would be nice if they kind of were able to provide a little reminder of how good they are and actually do it against a team that obviously is one that, you may see in the playoffs.
So just on that, and I was one of the masses that didn't hit like on your tweet, and I
it's not a very fun tweet.
I do a fun tweet. No, I mean I didn't like it. So I mean I'm just staying true to myself, Frank, which is what I try and do on Twitter.
Well, but I asked you the other day, like, what was the most impressive Bucks win after opening night, and you were like, I think you literally said, "Who cares?" Well, to which I would say, what are the random stupid things that we've spent hours talking about? We just spent like 40 minutes talking about Boogie Cousins getting waived, right? Who cares about that? Yeah. So anyway, Kane, finish your thought.
Well, in my defense, I think it was about 2 a.m. Australian time, and I was half asleep, and I just thought I'd throw a barb and then put my phone down and see what happens when I woke up in the morning. But no one really got upset about it. You didn't even respond to my.
I don't even respond to you. I don't respond to Dean ever because it's I just ignore you guys.
That's a good point. But what I was going to say, and I just got a haircut. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. If you're not watching on YouTube, you use this as an excuse to jump on YouTube. But as you do when you go to the barbershop, you talk to shout out to Mikey, by the way. I'm sure he's not listening to the podcast, but we were talking.
Are you getting more haircuts now that you're a TV personality?
Oh, absolutely. I used to get haircuts like once every 4 months, and it was actually embarrassing. But now I have to try and do something. So anyway, and he's a big Knicks fan, and he was saying, well, what teams do you think are good in the NBA? And I said, well, it's actually, you can't really base it off the regular season because no one's played. And if you really wanted to sift through the matchup data and who played and who didn't play, so that would be the only pushback I would have with the plus 500 record, because you would have to go through and say, well, okay, well, the Bucks have hardly had their best lineup. So that's all I'm going to say. That would be the only pushback. To me, I still look at it as I've never really looked at a regular season like this where I'm like, I don't know what the hell any of this means. Just win when you can, and hopefully you're healthy when it matters. I don't know.
Yeah, I still think though, I don't want the Bucks to be like the 6th seed, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely.
I think you really want to be a top 4 seed. Yep. So at least you have home court in the first round, and perhaps most importantly, you're not having to play, like a legitimately good team on the road in the first round. I mean, the Bucks swept the Heat, but I don't want to play the Heat on the road in the first round of the playoffs. I mean, you got to take the regular season seriously enough and play at a high enough level to give yourself at least a good chance to make your first round a little bit easier than it otherwise would be. So yeah, I mean, again, I think this season is, like, as you said, because of how weird it's been for every team, it's made it harder to really take a whole lot from this regular season relative to others. I mean, like the Jazz, your guy Joe Ingles, the first Jazz player to get COVID, all season. That's probably a reason why the Jazz have just, wrecked most, a lot of teams. They're a good team and they've had no COVID issues so far, right? I mean, that's a pretty good competitive advantage that, now has caught up, unfortunately, with the Bucks. And, we'll see, right? I mean, I think we're all just sort of hoping that the league sort of gets through the next month, and, all these guys catching Omicron hopefully will, then not be susceptible to catching anything else the rest of the season. But who knows, right? And as we said, I mean, Drew Holiday hasn't had COVID in a year and a half at this point, or not a year and a half, in about a year. And so here we are, speculating about, reinfections and stuff like that, right? It's a crappy place to be as fans, but I think, again, the Bucks don't, have to finish ahead of the Chicago Bulls, the Chicago Bulls are first in the East right now. it's impressive, man. I mean, say what you will. I mean, they've had a bunch of absences too. Some teams have just worked through it better than others. But the Bucks are still on the higher end of absences and games lost this year. So it's not like, they're just like every other team. But again, I think, certainly Bucks have had some streaks, but, they've really just kind of gotten fat on bad teams. And now is the test to see, can they actually win a little more consistently against teams that, are more of the quality that they're going to have to face in the playoffs.
No doubt. And as we wrap it up, I will just point out that as when you talk about home court for the playoffs, which would be lovely, we can't sit back here and rely on a choke of epic proportions from the Philadelphia 76ers again to give the Bucks back home court. I don't think there's any Philadelphia fans listening, and they certainly probably wouldn't have lasted 40 minutes. But if they're on, take that. That's my barb as we wrap up the podcast. Frank, good to catch up with you again. Like I said, the Bucks play the Nets. That's going to be Friday night. We'll have a podcast tomorrow in between in the lead up to that game. But in the meantime, like I said, let us know whether it's Twitter, on YouTube, your thoughts on this Boogie Cousins stuff. I know it's going to spark a lot of debate. It was fun breaking it all down here. Until tomorrow, for Frank and myself, we'll catch you guys later.